Hello and welcome to Sacred Psychology, the podcast for misfits and mystics. Here, neuroscience and spirituality go hand in hand. Join me, Tamara Powell, on a no-holds-barred adventure outside the box, because that's where all the truly great shit happens anyway. Welcome back to Sacred Psychology. I'm your host, Tamara Powell. My guest today has a fascinating story to tell. In this world of modern-day at-home DNA kits, there have been a lot of stories coming across on Twitter, Reddit, Facebook, etc., with shocking results when those things come back. And Jodi Klugman-Rabb, who I'm interviewing today, is no stranger to such an event. In fact, she's a licensed marriage and family therapist in California who discovered that she was what is now known as an NPE, a non-paternal event, after taking one of these commercial DNA tests. Discovering her father was not her biological father rocked her sense of identity and inspired her to use the experience to help others navigate the grief and family dynamics. Obviously, as a diehard existentialist and therapist myself, I was totally intrigued by her story. Y'all have heard me talk on and on before about how much I love genealogical work and how important it has been for so many of my clients. But damn, what do you do when you're getting a result that you didn't expect? That's where Jodi comes in. She hosts her own podcast on the subject called Sex, Lies, and the Truth, and writes a blog on Psychology Today to help others find their voice in the NPE arena. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming the one, the only, the ever incomparable Jodi Klugman-Rabb. Hey, Jodi, welcome to the show.
Hi, Tamara. Thanks for having me on. It's very exciting.
It's so exciting for me, too. You have such a fascinating story and one that is becoming more and more common. I've seen entire threads devoted to this topic. So this is certainly a timely issue and podversation that we're having. But before we dive into all of that good stuff, can you tell my listeners a little bit more about you and your background before this big event happened?
Absolutely. So I am a psychotherapist in Marin County and Napa County, California. Mm-hmm. I have a private practice, and most of my practice has been centered around traumas and helping people with a wide variety of traumas, including first responders, but civilians as well. Mm-hmm. I've helped people with 9/11, both on the civilian and first responder end, sexual abuse, domestic violence, medical emergencies and medical traumas like waking up in surgery.
Wow.
Various fears like fear of flying and different phobias. All sorts of things that you could use EMDR for. So that's one of my focuses in my practice. And the other is adult ADHD.
Oh, really?
EMDR is one of those kind of random, hard to explain, but fascinating and really efficient therapies that really takes care of hardcore stuff that otherwise would take talk therapy several years.
Yes. Yeah. So I didn't plan on jumping down that rabbit hole, but let's do that briefly because I haven't had too many guests on that are certified in EMDR, and having had it personally, I can attest to its authenticity, and I send plenty of my clients out for it. What's fascinating though is I think psychology still takes itself a little too preciously sometimes. And I remember going through grad school and I had a diehard behaviorist for a professor in one of my classes. And she just thought it was magic finger waving and let us know at every point and turn that there was no scientific basis, which of course we now know is not true at all.
That's like all there is scientific evidence to support it.
Hello. Yeah. Evidence-based therapy. It's what we do. So EMDR, can you break that down just briefly, what the acronym stands for and why it's awesome?
Absolutely. It's a strange name, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And it's somewhat obsolete in terms of the name because it's no longer just eye movements. We can use the two other senses of sound and touch as well. And we can incorporate a combination of any two of them to really bolster how a person processes a trauma. And it's a neurological reprocessing of an experience. And even though you're crossing the imaginary midline of the body, it's not hypnosis. So it's the bilateral stimulation of going across that bilateral stimulation of the imaginary midline of the body. It's not hypnosis, but it does help the two hemispheres of the brain to start talking about a trauma that's otherwise separated and put kind of out on its own. And that's where you get PTSD symptoms, where the intrusive thoughts and it feels like things are on a loop, hyperarousal and things like that. So the EMDR is a nice, efficient, tidy way of getting all of the emotions around a particular trauma to settle back down. And then you can just remember it as an event without the toxic emotional input that is usually attached to it.
Perfect. Yeah, I couldn't have said that more succinctly myself. And it is amazing. So jumping forward a little bit, you actually said
Sure.
EMDR was helpful for this topic that we're diving into about.
Exactly.
Yes.
That's why I brought it up. So when I was going through this personal DNA discovery, the first thing I did was run to my therapist, who I have done EMDR with for a variety of other things in my past. And thank goodness I did, because she didn't have a lot of experience with adoption. And she didn't really know how to approach this issue because of that. And because of the EMDR, it was the one way to reach this particular experience, because it did feel very traumatic. So I'll go back and explain that in 2011-ish, I took a 23andMe DNA test just for fun, thinking this will be kind of a nice way to get to know my dad's family a little bit more. My dad died 23 years ago this year. Suddenly, his family was Jewish, and he didn't have a lot of family background. There wasn't a lot of information handed over because a lot of the family was known to have perished in the Holocaust, and traditionally, Jewish families with that background don't talk about it very much.
Right.
So I had some basic info. Our last name, Klugman, it's a German name, but they had evidently emigrated from Germany at some point to Russia. And I don't know how long they were there, but they came over to the United States from Russia, from modern day Belarus. So that's what I had going into it, and that was it. So I was expecting to find a little bit more detailed information, maybe some maps of how they immigrated over the years. And with Ancestry.com, you can get all sorts of information from records. So I was hoping to get all of that. What I got out of it instead was I had none of that. No German background, no Russian background.
Oh my goodness.
I might have had a little bit of Balkan, because at the time it was going by some regions rather than specific countries, because that all depends on the sample size and how large a sample size is for an area. So let me back up again even further. I went into the test assuming I was 50% Italian on my mom's side, and then varying degrees, probably a quarter each, of German and Russian on my dad's side. What it showed after the test was that I was a quarter Italian and a quarter Spanish, so mom didn't realize that there was some Spanish ancestry, and then 50% Scottish, which was never part of any family folklore ever. So It was a bit surprising. But it was also kind of strange, because I have had this irregular affinity for what I just kind of lumped together as Britain, Scotland, Britain, the culture, the literature, kind of the fairy tale aspect of it for most of my life. And I had no idea why. And it was kind of frustrating for my mom, who was like, "Why are you so interested in this? We're Italian." Like, well, I don't know. I know all about the Italian side. This is interesting, though. I don't know why I like it. So for some reason, it just didn't occur to me when I got the results what it meant.
Right.
And it's obvious that with 50% of anything, it's a first degree relative. It's not somewhere far back in the ancestry. It's apparent. And so one day, finally, I was on vacation, and I think it was because I had settled down and kind of let loose that it smacked me like upside the head. And I literally heard it as a whisper in my ear. "He cannot be your father. Somebody else is your dad." And I went, oh my God. And I immediately called my cousin who is adopted. And I said, what do you think of this? And he said, it makes sense. But what are you going to do about it? And I didn't know. I sat on it for a while because what do you do when you find out something like this, of this magnitude? Yeah, it was surreal. And finally, something my husband said spurred me into action. His statement was, everybody that's involved in this is getting older. So this is a parental generation. Your mom is in her 70s. This other guy is probably in that same age range. So how much longer do you want to wait? You might risk missing them. I said, oh, you're right. All right, but I don't know what to do next. The dad who raised me, who I will still refer to as my dad, has one sister, and she's still living. I said, I think the thing I have to do is test with her and see if we match, just to confirm, because I can't just go on with an assumption. And he said, you're right. So I bought her a test. She was happy to take it. I didn't tell her the whole truth, but I told her enough of it. I said, I would just like to know more about the family background. And that was true enough. And then, of course, the test came back that we were not related in any way.
Wow.
So she was all upset. And I said, wait, how long have you known this? Because really, I think you have. I think you've known this all along.
She called you out.
No. I called her out.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. So part of the family history for me is that I have curly red hair. And for most people, when they look at me, they say, oh, you look like Brave, like Merida from Brave. And I would laugh that off and say, oh, yeah, that's right. And I come from Marin County, where a lot of the people who work at Pixar, a lot of the executives live. And I always have joked, I think somebody used my likeness without telling me. Well, it turns out I am pretty much Merida from Brave. I come from the same area, come from the same Highlands of Scotland.
Wow.
And I have had zero in common with my dad's family my entire life. I don't look anything like them. I'm the only redhead in both sides of the family, even my mom. I have no mannerisms like them, no facial features, nothing. So it always stood out to me as something about me didn't fit in, but I had no context with which to understand it, and just kind of wrote it off as this just meaningless. I don't know what this is about, but I'm just going to try and forget it. But it always nudged at me and bothered me. So now I had some answers to some questions that really haunted me for most of my life, and stuff started to fit in, like why I was so interested in Scotland, why I didn't get along with some family members. It turns out a lot of them already knew and just didn't want to say anything and rock the boat. So I ended up hiring a genealogist to just verify everything. Because again, when you're having conversations with people saying, hey, I just found out that my dad isn't my dad, most people are going to say, well, how do you really know? So I wanted to be able to say, I know, it's true. I verified the DNA results, and I had a third party independently do so. So first thing she said was, don't doubt the DNA results. They're absolutely valid. What you need to doubt is your mom. Your mom's story isn't right. And I said, I figured that.
Here, though.
Yes. But I kind of expected it going in. Because typically it is the mom. Yeah. It's really hard to hide maternal lineage. You generally know who your mom is unless you're adopted. So the second thing the genealogist said was, well, I know you hired me to try and validate this, but I think what you really want me to do is find your dad. And I said, okay, I guess so. We might as well.
Yeah.
I expected this to take years. Sure. It took less than 2 months.
Wow.
She has incredible resources. She found him pretty quickly, but because she couldn't find a residential listing address for him, she wasn't able to validate it 100%. And by the way, she found him through one of his second or third cousins on his side who had uploaded his DNA to the Ancestry.com database.
Yeah.
BioDad himself hadn't actually done it, but found him through a family member. So that's kind of the same scenario that they found the Golden State Killer through.
Right.
Not direct, but through other lineage. So it's really interesting. So we find the guy. He turns to live out 40 minutes away from me, if that.
Whoa.
She goes through a whole protocol of how to contact family. We do that. I send him a registered letter. He doesn't respond. In fact, he sends it back.
Oh, no.
Unopened. Yeah. I was starting to get kind of irritated.
I would imagine.
I'm reaching out to you. I had no idea if he knew who I was or anything about me. And then I tried calling. No answer. He wouldn't return the messages. So against my genealogist's direct orders, I went in and knocked on his door. And I said, I need some answers. And I think I'm only going to get this if I show up at his house.
Damn, girl.
Yeah. That's that brave part again.
Yeah, I see that.
Yeah. So I knock on his door, and this is 2017 Labor Day weekend. It is abnormally hot in the Bay Area. It's 100 degrees, and it's 9 o'clock in the morning. And it's just very unusual up here. I am profusely sweating because of the heat and because I'm nervous as hell. Mm-hmm. And I knock on the door, and I ask, "Are you Tim?" And he says no. And I was confused. I had prepared for a variety of scenarios, but not really that one.
Yeah.
And I said, "Are you sure? Because I know he lives here. He's been at this address, or he's listed at this address for about 15 years or so." He said, "I sometimes get his mail here, but no, I'm not him." And the way he looked at me, it was just not the kind of look that you give somebody that you're trying to get rid of. Mm-hmm. And he had blue eyes, and I have blue eyes. I thought, I don't believe this guy, but I didn't know what else to do, so I left. We got about 10 minutes down the road, and we parked, and I said, "It just doesn't sit right. I don't feel like that was true. I think it was really him. So let's go back." And I'll go back and knock on the door again.
Wow.
And he's hard of hearing, so it took him a while to come back to the door, and I thought perhaps I blew it. Like, he knows I'm out here, and he's not going to come back out. Mm-hmm. He answered the door a second time, and he was kind of irate. "What do you want?" he said. I said, "Look, my name is Jody. I'm your daughter. I think you're Tim. And is this a picture of you?" And I shoved my phone in his face, and it had his high school yearbook photo on it, which was the only photo we could find. The dude is not on any social media. He's kind of off the grid altogether. Mm-hmm. So it was really hard to find anything about him. And it stunned him. He's like, "How did you get this?" And I thought, perhaps I shouldn't tell you that I've been stalking you and I hired somebody to find you. So I'm going to tell you that part later. And I just said, "Well, I've just come across it as I searched for my dad, who I believe you are, and I think you know my mom." And it took him a few minutes, and he just kind of sat there in silence. And he finally said, "All right, come in." So my husband and I walked in, and 2 hours later, I learned he knew about me from birth. The reason that we couldn't find a residential listing for him was because he was renting a room from my mom after he sold her the house.
Wow.
So we never would have found that. And he left when I was 2. And he believed that my mom knew the entire time who my dad was. But because he left, and because she was married to somebody else at the time, she chose to put me off as somebody else's kid so that I would have a birth certificate that was mainstream, shall we say.
Cohesive.
So it was a bit of a shock. He was open to a relationship. And when you go into this sort of thing, it's the one thing that you're really hoping for, unless some people already go into it knowing, I don't want anything from this person. I just kind of want to know where I come from, and then I can walk away.
Sure.
The majority of people were in the camp that I was in. I want to know you, and I want to have some sort of relationship with you. So he was open to that. I also learned that I have a half brother that I didn't know about. And growing up an only child, that was probably one of the biggest shocks for me, that I have a sibling.
I bet.
And a sister-in-law and a nephew and all sorts of cousins and fun stuff. So it took a rather slow pace after that. We started connecting and getting to know each other. And I think about a month later, I started talking with my brother and have established a relationship with him. But have since learned that Mom at the time, the Bay Area in the 70s, was still living very much in the shadow of the summer of love. Mm-hmm. So there was a lot of free love, a lot of drugs, a lot of rebellion against 1950s, early 60s constraints, right? So Mom was definitely living that up. She was in a very unhappy marriage to a guy who was living half the time somewhere else. He was in the Army, and most of his assignments were out of the area. So she was pretty unhappy, and she was taking matters into her own hands and having some fun. Mm-hmm. It turns out, though, that she was having enough fun that she didn't know who my dad was. And she just picked a guy. Mm-hmm. Yes. So, long story short, my known family, through the dad that raised me on the Klugman side, has decided that they're very unhappy with this arrangement, extremely unhappy that I pursued knowing who my bio dad was and establishing a relationship, so much so that they decided to cut me off. So I have no connection with them anymore.
While I have empathy with that, it's still always surprising to me how the human psyche tends to take moments like that so personally. Like this was your parental identity discovery process, as you've now named it, and yet rather than be happy for you to have finally filled in this missing link, we're now offended. It's almost like it lessened in their mind. I think they're afraid that you are lessening their role in your life. But isn't it funny that the brain would even go there?
Yes. Well, they would have had to have played a role at all in my life in order to feel offended.
I see.
And they didn't have that to begin with. And there's a bit of a backstory there that probably isn't totally relevant to this podcast, but they showed me who they were by being really aggressive and hostile when I was giving them some of the information about what I was doing. And I said, all right, I think we're done. I think we haven't had enough of a positive history to make it worth for me going through this with you. So I'm gonna just let you bow out. Mm-hmm. So their fear or their upset that they have been replaced, from my perspective, they actually created that.
Yeah.
Because I was perfectly happy to have everyone in my life. But now, because of how they've treated me and approached the subject, they've gone even so far as to tell my kids' contemporaries, their cousins, that we're not really cousins anymore. And they don't have to think of us that way. So they've really taken it to the nth degree. Wow. Meanwhile, I have a whole new family, most of whom I've never met. I've just spoken with through social media or text. Some of whom I've met in person, who are completely open and embracing of this new discovery and are happy to have a relationship with me. So it's a strange dichotomy. But it left me with a huge identity confusion when I was going through all this.
I would imagine.
And I was not prepared for it. It bowled me over. And it was that coupled with a grief. Like I was saying goodbye to who I thought I was, even though, because I didn't have a strong relationship with my dad's side of the family, I didn't quite know who that person was from that aspect. So the grief was rather complicated. And the identity piece was really complicated. And that's where the EMDR came in. And it made an enormous impact on how quickly I was able to handle this. So the EMDR is valuable in this scenario.
It's from my perspective, it really helps get that emotion flowing. So it's not stuck, as Besser van der Kolk says, the issues are in the tissues. And so when we've got...
Yeah, precisely.
We get these big events, it's almost like we store it a little bit over here and a little bit over there. And EMDR it's almost, I don't want to call it a quick fix, but it is a very quick processing supplement to the therapeutic work that you were doing.
Yes. And I don't believe that I would have gotten to the resolution that I have come without it. And it's because of that I said, there has to be a reason why this is happening. Because I'm a therapist, I am in a position to help people go through this. And I thought, in the time you feel like you're alone and this is only happening to me. But I have since learned I'm now one of about 4,400 people who are part of a secret Facebook group on what's traditionally termed non-parental events.
Right.
Or non-paternal events. We're now up to 4,400 people. And the estimation is that about 10% of people who take all these tests have this experience. So that's close to 2 million. I'm definitely not alone. And I thought, I've got to do something about this, because if I'm feeling this way, so is everybody else who's going through this. And with the advent of these at-home DNA tests, it's so easy to have this experience now and not go into it knowing that that's what's coming out of it.
Absolutely.
I mentioned adoption work earlier because those are the only populations that I have found who have a similar experience that I can draw from and say, here's some literature to help me support people, because they've already gone searching for biological family. And most of the time they grow up knowing that they straddle that line too between known family and biological family. So the adoption area was the strongest sense of influence thus far, but we're going to be seeing a lot more of people in my position where it comes out of left field and it illuminates family secrets that no one knew about before, that the moms in particular have been holding close to the vest for their entire lives.
Yes, brilliant point to make too, that, in our field, especially as counselors, it's important that we have resources and research to draw from. And we did not have at-home DNA tests for maybe 20 years? Certainly
right.
Not. I think I remember the last 10, them really blowing up. And so I would imagine that clients are first experiencing this. It's an automatic, where do I go? So how amazing to have a clinician that has both the training and the clinical or the personal experience to be able to walk them through this. I am loving the fact that you are, you've created the parental identity discovery process to help those affected by these DNA revelations.
Thank you. I changed the name because the non-paternal event is misleading. It's hard to understand what it is without having somebody explain it. Mm-hmm. And when we first learned it, my husband took offense. He said, "What do you mean non-paternal? There has to be a man involved." Of course there's a man involved.
Touche.
You can't say that. So I said, okay, fair enough. Mm-hmm. And I tried to come up with a term that was inclusive enough to include both moms and dads, but also adoptees as well as people in my position. We're all NPEs. We're all people discovering who the real parents are. Sometimes it's two unknown parents. Sometimes it's one. It's a ever increasing and changing field at this point. And the one unifier is the family secret that nobody expected would be found out because nobody could foretell the prolific nature of these at-home DNA tests.
Yeah, I read a Twitter feed once outlining, ironically, probably the week before I came across you in the podcasting group, talking about this one big Italian family's experience where one of the siblings bought all of her siblings at Christmas the ancestry kit, and mom instantly freaked out and said, no, only one of you needs to take that. And then the resulting drama between mom and dad upstairs and the siblings trying to decide which one of them was clearly not dad's.
Clearly not dad's. Oh, boy.
And it sparked apparently this entire Twitter feed of everyone else that had gone through a similar unexpected reaction to what is typically a happy thing. Oh, cool. The family's going to do this together. Yes.
So I have a lot of clients now with this particular backstory because I'm focusing on this in my practice. And probably the vast majority of them are, we just decided to do this for fun. My sister gave it to me. My mom decided, we'll do it. Whoever, somebody else said, here, do this. It will be fun. And they came out with, oh my God, this has changed my life and I didn't ask for this.
Right.
Yeah. And the small proportion of them are adoptees now coming in and saying, all right, you seem to understand it and I can't find an adoption specialist, so I want to work with you. Mm-hmm. Those are the two categories, but there are so many subcategories now.
Right.
It's not just like the story that you just said. It's, I didn't realize that I was the product of a sperm donation. And now you're seeing some really extreme cases of sperm donors who are doctors themselves, and they now have 40 or more children as a result of those donations, because there's no regulation in the United States as to how many donations a man can make.
Yep.
Yeah. So lots of different subcategories, even a few of people who have been trafficked as children, who were products of kidnapping and told that they were adopted, but now they're finding out from hiring their own genealogists and doing their own research that they were actually abducted from their families. And this is a whole new alarming subcategory of parental identity discovery.
So this makes me, again, really grateful that we have you to, share how it's normal to go through a whole range of emotions and all the stages of grief, not necessarily in a linear order for almost everyone I would say for everyone that's involved in the story, because not just for
everyone,
but, the moms, the siblings, the dads, it's
going to rock everybody's world.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And that's why we started the podcast. So the genealogist that I hired, she and I hit it off and we became good friends. Her name is Christina Fitzgibbons. She also is in Marin County. Mm-hmm. And we decided we're going to host a podcast to educate and normalize so that people in my position could hear they're not alone. And they could also hear how to handle it, as well as suggest to their family, hey, you should listen to this and it might help you handle it. So that's our mission with our podcast, and that's called Sex, Lies, and the Truth.
I love that title. And I love the title of your blog on Psychology Today, too.
Thanks. That's Finding Family.
Yeah. A modern guide to family with parental identity discovery and non-paternal events, which helps explain it so succinctly. I was thinking about was your mother still alive? I can't remember when they decided to do this.
She is. And here's an interesting caveat to the story. Not only is she alive, she lives with me and my family.
Whoa.
So it's been quite an exercise in family dynamics to go through this with her while she's been living at my house. I did not happen to tell her what I was doing until it was all over. And that was at the suggestion of the same adopted cousin that I have, who happens to be a cop. And he said, you never interrogate the witness unless you have all the information first.
Good point.
So after I laughed at that, I said, all right, fine, I think you're right. And made sure that I had found him first and had contacted him before I confronted her on what was the truth. And it took her a while to come to it, but we finally gotten there.
Yeah, because especially if I think about, the days of, hippies, and even I work with a lot of, one of my niches is polyamory. And so, as a triad or a quadrat or whatever we're playing with, a lot of times I'll make the decision to raise them, as you were talking earlier, in a more normative thing on the birth certificate. And then here comes the advent of these, and I'm a huge fan. I did both Ancestry and I'll get into that in a minute, and 23andMe for, existential reasons. But then we've got this side effect of, especially if I put myself in the mom's position or dad's position of, oh my God, you thought you were safe in the 60s and the 70s or in this polyamorous situation. And now you got some splaining to do, Lucy, Yes,
you do. Yes, you do.
A lot of fear, I would imagine, instantly incited in someone.
Absolutely. And she was pretty upset with me that I was bringing this out. And I said, I get it, but I think you need to understand that at least nowadays, nobody cares. Right. Nobody cares about the backstory or the fact that you were having sex, because everybody is.
Right.
Everybody was then. They just weren't talking about it. And everybody is now. Because if we don't, we all die out as a species. So it's going to happen one way or the other. And you just happened to do it in a way that wasn't generally accepted for women at the time. Oh, well.
Yes.
She comes from a generation where she's pretty embarrassed that it's out. But I told her as soon as I had disclosed that I found him and that I knew what had gone on, I said, I am going to do something about this professionally, because I can't just have gone through this and not benefited from it. This is something I can do to help others. And I'm already a therapist. I'm already helping others, but this is different. This is going to be something really personal, and it's kind of like a mission for me now. Right. And she finally understood that, but it took her a long time to kind of hand over the reins of the story. And that's one of the themes that we continually pursue in the podcast, and that I write about at length in my blog, the Finding Family blog, that most of the moms in this scenario are not telling the truth, are intentionally withholding information, or putting extreme limitations on the relationship with their kid once this comes out. And it's really unfortunate, because they were the holders of the story up until the point that their kid found out.
Right.
And I think you could even argue that up until the point that the kid was born, ownership of that story transferred to that child.
Yeah.
And nobody else, parent, aunt, stepfather, whoever, nobody else has a right to tell that kid what they can and cannot do with that information. Because now you're telling them that they do not have the right to be a whole person and that they can only live in parts and the parts that are acceptable to those around them. And that's unfair.
I couldn't agree more. And I love that you brought that up. Something else that I would not have thought about, but can see, had an intuitive sense that autonomies were being bumped up against each other. It's a desire to connect while still remaining intact.
Yes.
Whew.
Yes. And don't forget that the people in my position are trying to rebuild themselves simultaneously while going through this. So they don't want to rock the boat. They don't want to cut off relationships, God forbid. That's the worst case scenario.
Right.
But some people are forcing that.
Yeah.
They're absolutely forcing that option. And that's too bad because it doesn't have to be like that.
Which added a whole new layer of understanding for me as a clinician reading on your website. I did not know this till I saw it on your website that Erik Erikson was the product of an affair, and talk about informing systems work.
Right. I had no idea either until I went through this.
Wow.
So, yeah, we go through things for a reason. And I have friends who hate it when I say that. They say, no, that's not true. I say, well, for me, it makes sense. It's a way to make sense of why you have to go through negative experiences because of what you learn on the other side. And sometimes something better happens. For instance, my dad, who died 23 years ago, had he not died when he did, I never would have met my husband. I met him the week after at my dad's funeral.
Whoa. Good. Wow.
Yeah.
I hope you're writing a memoir.
I'm trying. I keep getting that suggestion. I'm trying to figure out how to write this in a way that people would want to read it.
Interesting side note, didn't mean to talk about this, but I think it's cool on the air. There's been several that I've loved from fellow therapists. I'm thinking about one now called Men on My Couch. And it's about, since my specializations in sexuality and gender, it's a woman, I think she's so ballsy. She reminds me of Yalom in that she's writing about her sexual awakening and also her therapeutic rapport and counter resistance to her male clients coming in, talking about their sex lives. Yeah. So it's cool when clinicians can talk about the clinical side, but then also give anecdotes, and your story just screams the possibility for that if you were ever interested in doing it that way. Yeah.
For sure.
Another one, she's not a therapist. I think she's a coach. She wrote No Mud, No Lotus, which is pretty much the same thing that you're saying right now, that it happens to us for a reason. And she went through a sexuality cult. I think it was in the free love days. So,
wow.
And becoming basically what we used to probably would have called like a temple prostitute, but she's more like the cult believed that if you had sex with this initiate, that you could, channel divine love. And so she wrote about it too. I think it would be fascinating either way, but
yes, for sure. It reminds me of Charles Manson, and probably because one of his kids, he has several kids from the women in his family, quote unquote. But there was a man, let me explain it this way, who thought that he was one of those illegitimate children that came out of that union. And I think it's been disproven, but in my research in finding who else was out there who was NPE, I found a lot of celebrities, and this one guy showed up. But like I said, I think he's been disproven as not being related to Charles Manson, although he looks like his spitting image. It's kind of weird.
But still, I think the point is the journey of him having to go looking and questioning his own identity. That's quite the experience to have to go through. And so whether it's predestined or not, the hardships that we go through, I still firmly believe in your mess can become your message, right? It's what are you going to do with it now?
Oh, that's a nice tagline. Can I use that?
Oh, absolutely. I didn't come up with it. I don't know where I got it, but I love it. I use it a lot.
I do too. What am I going to do with it? Well, I'm continuing with my podcast. I'm continuing with the blog. I do hope to write a memoir at some point. And my message, I think, is to take this out as far as I can. I'd like to speak about it. I'd like to train clinicians on how to work with people, because I only think that the population will get bigger.
Absolutely.
I mean, I don't think you could have gone through a holiday season without seeing all the specials on these tests. So there's going to be a whole new crop of people like me coming out. I'd like to train families on how to support the people going through this, because one of the surprising things for me was the reaction I got from people universally when I started to disclose what was going on. It was not helpful. And the first thing that came out of everybody's mouth was, well, this doesn't change who you are. And I thought, oh my God, you have no idea. How can you say such an insensitive thing? Now, of course, they're saying something to make themselves feel better because they don't know what to say.
Right.
But that was ironically the very thing that I was struggling with. This has changed everything about who I am. I wasn't even sure that I wanted to keep my last name. I didn't have any attachment to the new name.
Sure.
I'm not a McLeod. I was not raised a McLeod. Now, as I have more of a relationship with my bio dad, I'm starting to feel more like one. But I think I'm going to leave my name the way it is. Some people are choosing to change their names. And I think that
you should have the option.
You should have the option. But I think it speaks of not having that much of a connection with the family that you were raised with to begin with. And that's why they're going that direction. So, there are so many nuances to this experience that even though I'm well through this, I'm still discovering parts of it.
Yeah.
So it's a work in progress.
Absolutely. It just reminds me of our family's ancestry stories. We actually went to Ancestry and 23andMe on purpose to find my grandfather, my grandmother, or I guess great-grandfather. My grandmother was a Swedish immigrant, and she was born out of wedlock, fresh off the boat in Minnesota, little Sweden. And we always had a name, but could not find or prove it. And she passed away of breast cancer in 2010. And I got her scraps of paper and all of her stuff that she has tried, this is before the internet, tried to start piecing together her genealogy. Wow. And so me loving research and data analysis dove head first. And now we've got Ancestry and people love it or hate it. I am a huge, huge fan and proponent. Obviously, it's got its complications like we're talking about today.
It absolutely does, but it has its uses.
And so I took the DNA test. We had several other family members take the DNA test. And I had, before the DNA tests went live, had started a basic genealogy tree with the information that I had and the name. And a woman from California contacted me and said, excuse me, this Hagberg has no children, was never married. And I was like, well, I don't think he was married, but I do think
you can still have kids.
He may have had a child. And she said, oh, and I told her, the information that I had from my grandmother before she passed away. And she said, that's interesting, huh? Just keep me posted. Kind of blew me off. And it stung a little, but I understood it, And so then a few months later, DNA test comes in and all of a sudden, ding, our trees are linked. And we are third cousins, which would be the case with 3 generations up. Had to contact her again and was like, hey, so.
Hi, cuz.
Yes, confirmed DNA match. It turns out, though, the woman was actually a hired genealogist for the family. And so now I have just received the contact information. I'm going to contact this woman who's probably in her 70s, maybe 80s now. And she would have been my grandmother's cousin. And she's our last hope because nobody, as far as I can tell, has uploaded my great-grandfather's information at all. So all I have is his name and, census info. I don't have any photos, no information.
Oh, wow. What a mystery.
It's been interesting to watch all of my families and now our extended families' reaction to this.
Yes. You don't know what you're going to find. It changes the narrative of your family story. And some people get very bent out of shape. Like, gosh, we are no longer fit within that perfect square. We are now an oblong, and we don't know what to make of that. I have some people who have discovered that their, secret parent is actually convicted of sexual assault, and sometimes of children. And sometimes you don't necessarily want to find these people, even though you want to know who they are. The stories that you find that go along with them are really upsetting, and so you'll have to make peace with that as well. And then on the other flip side of that, the families who are discovering that they had family members who behaved in secret ways and have these secret children.
Right.
And what do you make of that? What does that mean about the family now?
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. Unfortunately, they're both passed now on our side of the family. And like I said, I just want a photo. We just want to know what Grandpa looked like. So I'm still crossing my fingers that someone's willing to reach out to us. But apparently my grandmother called him in the 60s or 70s and said, hey, would you like, it's very similar to you, just ballsy. I'm your daughter. Would you like to meet any of your 5 grandchildren? And he said no. And she said, okay. And that was it.
And that was it. Oh boy.
Yep. So we shall see unfolding. Yeah. But lots of feels there. I can understand why your clients would be all over the place. And
yes.
So good to have.
And you have to end up matching the other person's pace. So like, for instance, when I first started looking, I couldn't wait. Like, this needs to happen faster. This is taking a really long time, and I want people to make connections now. And I had the benefit of a couple of months of time to get used to this and adjustment. But when I found BioDad, he was being confronted all at once. He had no time to adjust, and I'm asking him to get up to speed with me, and that was uncomfortable for him in the beginning. So I had to slow way down, and that was a challenge. So there's lots of nuances around how to handle various aspects that come up from this discovery. This experience is multi-layered. It's very challenging to everyone involved, but primarily the person discovering their NPE or parental identity discovery status, because you're being asked to balance so many things.
Right. I'm so glad you used that word, because I was just about to say, this really reminds me, especially in thinking about family systems work, of, a baby mobile hanging over an infant's crib, and you just rocked the boat by pulling on your side.
Yep.
And now we're watching all of the other hanging pieces try and find their homeostasis again.
Exactly. And it fragments some families, because you'll have some people who say, yes, I absolutely want a relationship with you. And their siblings will say, oh God, no, I can't handle this. I don't even want to think about what this means for how I have thought about our family, or how I've thought about Dad, or whoever it might be. So it starts to fragment people. My latest podcast that just went up spoke about that directly. The subject, Erin, had been in foster care, and when she found her BioDad, she found, oh gosh, I can't remember, I think 5 siblings.
Whoa.
2 or 3 of whom are willing to have a relationship with her, and the others said no. So it's a strange balance of trying to manage who can I connect with, who can I not, and then what does that do to that family? Some people have been welcomed into family events, and some people say, no, you can't come to our grandmother's birthday party. We don't want you there. You're not part of this family. So there's lots of opportunity for rejection. It's really screwed up.
So many. It's like a kaleidoscope. The more you talk about it, the more I say, oh, there's a point I hadn't thought of, and there's another filter I'm seeing it through. So grateful that we have you and others who are willing to be so open and vulnerable. I mean, if there's any reason why this mess landed in your lap, I'm so glad that you now have this microphone, that you are making it a message, because, not everyone having gone through it would even be willing to speak of it so vulnerably.
Yeah. And I honestly think that was kind of my saving grace, was just coming out with it and laying it all out there for everyone to see. I don't know how you feel about this, Tamara, but as a therapist, I feel my life is very personal. I am not an in front of the camera type of person. I'm really on the shy side, generally speaking. And this experience has I have handled completely different. And I think it has been very useful for me.
It was meant to be. I bet therapeutic in so many ways.
Yes.
I'm great with other people's feels, but it's hard for me to express mine in public. So even if I'm giving a teaching or a webinar or I am on camera, it's definitely much easier when it's not my stuff we're talking about.
I agree. I agree. I'm the one sitting listening quietly to you talk. We're not talking about me.
Exactly. Yeah. Oh, Jodi, thank you so much for today and for the work that you are doing. Besides your blog and the podcast is called Sex, Lies, and the Truth, where can people get in touch with you if they've got one of these stories and they're dying to know more?
Well, I have a few websites. So the sexliesandthetruth.com is the website for the podcast. My general website that talks about all the different areas of my practice is jkrabb with 2 B's.com. And then the specific parental identity one is parentalidentitydiscovery.com.
Love it. And I'll have links to all of that in the show notes so nobody has to pull over or get off the treadmill just yet to grab it. They can grab it later.
Great. Thank you so much, Tamara. I really appreciate the opportunity.
It was such a pleasure. Thanks for listening to the Sacred Psychology Podcast. I pray you found some inspiration and empowerment to go out and make this life the most fulfilling possible. You can follow Sacred Psychology on Facebook and YouTube. If you haven't yet, please go to Apple Podcasts and subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. Tag us on social media and let us know what you think as well. Please note that the information provided is not meant to convey professional, psychological, or medical advice. If you could use such services, I highly recommend seeking them out from someone you trust. To get in touch with me personally or to see how we might work together, please check out ariatherapy.com or talesfromatrapezoid.com. Until next time, everyone.